When I was younger, I never failed to read the Dear Abby column in the morning newspaper. Even at a young age, one thing struck me as really interesting about the letters Abby received and the advice she gave. The problems people wrote about almost always boiled down to a breakdown in communication. It didn't matter if the writer was having an issue with a neighbor's dog barking at all hours of the night, or a guy could just not understand why, when he went out on dates, women suddenly lost interest in him when he began talking about his collection of superhero action figures. Whatever the issue, in so many words, Abby would respond by saying, "You need to communicate, or at least change how you communicate." It all seemed so obvious, and I thought it was funny that Abby got paid for basically saying the same thing over and over again. But she had to. Even those of us who think we're pretty smart about relationships and communication still find ourselves messing up on a regular basis. It's an old but true paradox that the more familiar we are with someone, the more we understand another person, the greater hurt we can inflict on them. We know exactly where their emotional buttons are located and when to press those buttons for maximum effect. And so it only makes sense to take greater care in how we communicate with them. But so often the opposite's true. Our familiarity can lead to complacency. That's why any relationship we have is a constant work in progress. Every relationship requires regular maintenance. That's true for couples and extended family members, for how we live next door to a neighbor, for how do we get along with coworkers, and for how we create and nurture a beloved community like our church. The good news is we all want to have healthy, positive relationships. We all need peace and wholeness and acceptance and belonging and love. And when we feel like we have that, life's pretty good. When we feel like we're lacking that, life can really stink. But we're not always well equipped to express what we need or how much we care about someone else in ways that stick. And again, occasionally, in spite of our best efforts, we simply mess up because we're human. So we reach out by doing something like writing a letter to Dear Abby, or we make an appointment with a counselor or a minister. Or a lot of us will visit a bookstore or go to Amazon.com and peruse the vast array of self-help books on relationships. I do that a lot. Not because I need any help, of course. I'm just keeping up with the current literature on this subject. I'm just doing research. But when I do visit the bookstore, what I find reminds me a whole lot of Dear Abby. A book might be packaged for a specific relationship problem, but they all still offer that same consistent advice: how to understand your needs and how to understand the needs of the person or the people who matter most to you, and how to communicate your care and your concern and your love for them. One of the best relationship books ever is not a book at all, but just one chapter of a book, and it's been out for a very long time. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's quoted a lot at weddings, and for good reason. But if we look at why it was written, it really did not originally have anything to do with romantic love or marriage. The Apostle Paul was writing to a church that was in trouble. The members were in serious conflict with each other. In this beautiful passage, he was expressing how the only way in the world they would ever get over themselves and move beyond their entrenched positions and be able to listen to each other was to understand the true nature of love, which is not always easy, because it does require one-on-one listening and not insisting on your own way, and not thinking that you need to know it all, and being willing to consider the needs of others before your own needs. In a nutshell, the true nature of love is all about giving yourself away. It's not only what God created us for, it's what God knows gives us the kind of life we're seeking and the life we need. Now, there's another book I really like about this, and I've often recommended to people by a psychologist named Gary Chapman. You're welcome to go out and buy it, but I'll save you that expense because I'm about to tell you what it says anyway. It's called The 5 Love Languages. And while the book is meant for couples, the steps it provides apply just as well to any relationship we have with family members, friends, neighbors, coworkers, and people we see on Sunday morning at church. So it works well for entire organizations too. And when Chapman uses that word, language, he's not just referring to the spoken word, but also to the unspoken action of communication. Actually, it's all about action. So the first love language is gifts. Not as simple as it sounds, because when we give someone a gift, we usually expect some reciprocity, even if it's a simple thank you. But Chapman is adamant about the act of giving without the expectation of any payback. When you love, you just give, and that's it. The gift of baking someone's favorite dish, or cleaning the house, or leaving a handwritten note just sitting on their desk. So you might ask, what happens when you give and you give and you give and the recipient never acknowledges or seems to appreciate your gifts? Well, since that's not the point of giving, and it's not an expectation of giving, then that's not a problem. If you do happen to receive something in return, then that's just icing on the cake. And that points to a basic rule of thumb about relationships. It's never a tennis match between two opponents. It's more that you're playing doubles, and your partner is your teammate on your side of the net, and you're giving them the gift of going after all the very best shots. The second love language is quality time. Now, especially when we can start counting our relationships in terms of years or decades, it's so easy to fall into patterns where each person's really busy with their own individual stuff. It can be a job or a hobby or something you do with other people. Quality time is intentionally creating moments to be together. And that doesn't mean making big vacation plans. It just means, again, intentionally scheduling things like lunches and dates and walks and having coffee together in the morning, all to demonstrate that this one, who should be the most important person in your life after all, is actually worth spending your time with. Number 3 is words of affirmation. Nothing is sweeter than to hear someone you love and care for telling you just that. And not only that, but pointing out what's wonderful about you, affirming how you look, how smart and talented you are, how proud they are of you, what a wonderful job you've done. When you make the effort to open your mouth and speak words of affirmation, even when you think it ought to be obvious and it should go without saying it anyway doesn't cost you a thing. It's an unselfish gift because it's not about you, it's about them. The fourth love language is acts of service. Now, this is a lot like the language of gifts, but more specifically, it has to do with making good things happen for the other person. Things that benefit their well-being, things that lighten their load, and all without being asked to do that. Now, these are not favors, because doing someone a favor implies they'll return the favor. An act of service is taking care of that chore, running that errand, doing that research, buying those tickets to the show, because you know he or she needs it to be done, and you are the person who can make that happen. The fifth and final love language is physical touch. A lot like the language of quality time, we can easily fall out of the habit of making physical contact. Of course, we have to be extremely careful with that with other people, especially in organizations like a church. Everyone is unique in their need for touching or being touched. A lot of us are huggers, but it's always best to ask the first time before you give someone a hug. However, gentle and loving, non-threatening touch is a big indicator of how emotionally connected people are. If you're in a relationship with someone special, appropriate touch in public tells your partner, and it tells the whole world, that you belong to one another. I used to train hospice volunteers in how to interact with patients. One of the key things we taught is how profoundly meaningful it is for a patient to feel the appropriate touch of another human being. Because so many other folks, even their own family members, can be afraid to do that with someone who's dying. But that unspoken human connection matters deeply. The 5 love languages, all these actions combined, communicate an acknowledgement that emotionally we need to receive and give love unselfishly. And self-giving is really what ties those 5 love languages together. It takes intentionality and it takes practice, but I believe that deep down we already know that giving ourselves away in love is what we're made to do. And it doesn't take much to imagine a relationship where partners speak those languages to each other every day. It's easy to imagine a neighborhood or a workplace where people put the best interest of the other person above their own. And I'm happy to say it's something I witness at Salem Church on a regular basis, a community of people giving themselves away, affirming and serving one another, spending quality time together, reaching out and touching and making a gift of yourself. 2 weeks ago, on the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, the members of our confirmation class, adolescents, and several of our adults visited the Neshaminy Manor Rehab and Nursing Center. We gathered in the common room with the residents there to meet them and to play games and work on fun activities at small tables that were spread throughout the room. But the activities were really just an avenue to listen to the residents' stories, to simply spend time being with people who don't often have visitors. We were there in a modest and simple way to give of ourselves. I kind of floated from one table to the next. I visit places like Neshaminy Manor all the time. It's just part of my work. So I was curious to know what our members were doing, how they were communicating. For some, especially the younger ones, but even some of the adults, it was the first time they'd ever done that, or done it in a long time at least. At one table, a couple of our folks, an adult and one of the confirmation class members, sat with 2 residents who were both older women, well into their 90s. I watched and I listened. In turn, the women eagerly talked about their lives, their families, what they'd experienced and enjoyed, what they still love. One woman was delighted that we were from a United Church of Christ congregation because she had been the pianist and organist at a UCC church for over 30 years. I watched as our 2 members listened to her story and how naturally the connection was made. There was laughter, and there were even tears, and words of affirmation, and wonder, and appreciation. Hands were extended across the table and held. There was thanksgiving. Yes, it was a very simple thing for us to do. It only lasted a couple of hours, but as I watched and listened, what I witnessed was a moment of sacred time. It was communion. Because at that table and every table, the language of love was spoken. People who woke up that morning as complete strangers became friends. Because of the language of giving yourself away with nothing expected in return. Because of the language that God speaks and needs us to speak for God's dream of beloved community to come true in every life. At Salem, we don't call our church a beloved community for nothing. Here, love is the language we speak because in our beloved relationship with God, we already know all the right words. Thanks for watching.